Welcome to the Tarryn Reeves Show, where your journey to empowerment takes center stage. I'm your host, Tarryn Reeves, best-selling author and publishing expert. Together, we'll dive into the hearts and minds of visionaries, disruptors, and trailblazing leaders to explore the most compelling and thought-provoking ideas in life, business, and marketing. Let's inspire, impact, and ignite. This is the Tarryn Reeves Show. Welcome to another episode. Today, I'm joined by Guy Dazin, who is an accomplished academic, playwright, writer, poet, painter, educator, and podcaster. This man is a very talented creative. He has dual degrees in English literature and art history. Guy currently teaches English at the prep school at Bar Ilan University. He has authored several poetry collections and plays, and his artwork is currently featured in 2 separate exhibitions. Beyond his artistic and academic pursuits, Guy has a profound interest in esotericism and mysticism, exploring diverse traditions such as Kabbalah, Daoism, Freemasonry, and Gnosticism. Welcome, Guy.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I like the show. I like you, the host, Tarryn. It's a great honor joining you on this platform.
It's a pleasure to have you. Now, we've definitely got an interesting conversation lined up because I love what you're doing with kind of new age thought, ancient wisdom, and the education system, because you are a teacher, you're currently teaching, plus doing all
Yeah.
of these other amazing things. How did you get into a space where you're kind of blending ancient wisdom and teaching?
Well, I think they go hand in hand ever since the academia in ancient Greece of Plato, which he nicknamed the academia, coined the term, which has lasted for thousands of years. Socrates was considered somewhat of a peculiar character, to use as subtle words. Nevertheless, his contributions and that of Aristotle to science, math, philosophy, natural history, all that comes from ancient Greece. And some of the teachings that were endowed to the Greek culture actually originated in far ancient cultures and civilizations. Today, they say like ancient civilization, it's a throwaway term, but it means something very specific. There were sacred teachings and initiation rites that a person who it's called a neophyte. Neophyte is someone who is seeking knowledge,
Mhm.
and initiate would have to pass through hoops and rings of fire to be baptized in fire until they can attain some knowledge that is esoteric, meaning it is not accessible or the public cannot be privy to that knowledge because there are several levels that you need to attain when it comes to attaining the knowledge, performing the sacred rites. So there's some path you need to take in order to achieve that enlightenment or esoteric knowledge. So yeah, there are a lot of things to talk about when it comes to that field and the study.
Definitely. Now, in today's fast paced, technology driven world, why do you think that ancient wisdom and these kind of practices still have a place, and how does it tie in?
I think that most of them are just, I'm going to throw a term, epistemological. So
Okay.
epistemologically, they are still correct when it comes to the scientific method that it's being implemented. So many people think that the mysticism hides some vast trove of ancient forgotten knowledge, but that's not really the case. The true case is that this is mystic schools and orders and all that kind of stuff. What they attain, what they try to achieve collectively and individually, they try to impart all of this scientific knowledge, and specifically scientific, because a lot of the mystical streams and denominations They rely heavy on science and the scientific method. And science originated in ancient Greece culture, specifically at Athens between the 6th century to the 4th century BCE, before the Common Era. And Pythagoras and Euclid, they founded the cornerstones or the fundamentals of mathematics. And
Mhm.
mathematics actually is another tool of describing the natural world. So, similarly to Euclidean Elements, his famous treatise is called the Elements. So, in the Elements, he talks about very rudimentary mathematics, talking about axioms, how the world is involved, or in the natural world, there are a lot of different shapes and natural forms that we need to pay attention to, like the Fibonacci sequence, for example, which is sometimes called the golden verse, and the Pythagoras who wrote the golden verses that has to do with mathematics. And Plato talked about the Platonic solids, a lot of different geometric shapes that are fundamental to the world, or the building blocks of the world are based on different geometric shapes. So, yeah, there's a lot to take. And these kinds of teachings today, they are not pseudoscience per se, but they are not the conventional academic and scientific wisdom. And of course, science has progressed far beyond the reaches of human imagination. By this point, there were things that were considered science fiction and imaginary in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. People like Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov, writers of science fiction, describe fantastical technological tools and equipment that they actually managed to foresee. They managed to prophesy the future. And we are the product of these kinds of people and these kinds of imagination.
Interesting. I've never thought about, I suppose, mysticism and things like that in the way that you're describing it. Now, like, I'm a massive nerd. Like, I love ancient Greek history. I love ancient Egyptian mythology, things like that. But what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I think that a lot of people, when they hear like Daoism or Kabbalah, like anything like that, they're not thinking in terms of science, they're thinking in terms of religion. And there's a very big, distinct difference, I suppose, in that way of thinking. But it doesn't have to be either or, it is and, right? It's science and
Yeah.
religion, or science
It,
and lifestyle and a way of living.
the word religion is very tainted. The word mysticism and spirituality and the oneness of nature, the
Mm,
unification of the individual and the world, they are one and the same. They are like the electron, two particles that mimicking each other all of the time, and you cannot grasp one without actually failing the observation. You can't actually measure just one particle at a time because they are mimicking each other and mirroring their own natural movements, if you can call them that. So the same for humans. Spirituality has been tainted by one colored brush, monochromatic in nature. And it's been tainted for a lot of people who are just curious and naturally inquisitive about their place in the universe. The big questions are there's a big taboo on the big questions, on the why question. Specifically, why is a very contentious question that you cannot answer. And the hollowed halls of academia, it doesn't
mm,
work. So you have to circumvent the system. It doesn't mean that you cannot enjoy a great career in academia, professional studies, or independently studying a lot of phenomena that you would like to emphasize or you think was not researched enough. You can do that. And there are a lot of independent researchers that do wonderful work. Even though Albert Einstein was a product of academia, he failed. He failed his studies in every level of his and matriculation. He did not succeed in his academic studies. He only got in mathematics. He got it. That's a misnomer. People think that Einstein was not great at mathematics. That it's the opposite way around. He was great at mathematics, but every other subject he failed. So he was an independent researcher and an independent thinker in a lot of ways. He was not an academician. Even though he was in academia physically, his mind, his ways of thinking and interpreting different phenomenons within physics, formulas, and established the principles of physics that they were thought to be the credo, and you cannot stray from the credo from the party line. Our fellow comrades would say you cannot stray from the party line. So there are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to studying, when it comes to mysticism. You cannot take one solution to solve all the problems. You need to find a lot of creative ways and you need to carve new paths to create this sort of new synapses in the brain for thinking. So
Mm.
once you create more and more and generate more new paths of thinking, I call them the synapses, because that's the way evolution and humanity has managed to advance for the past 50,000 years or so. We think that Homo sapiens have been around for 50,000 years at least, roaming the planet, taking shelter, hunter gatherers, all that stuff. We're not that far from the Neanderthals. And
Mm.
some of the customs and ceremonial aspects, even the social aspects, we inherited from the Neanderthals. Mourning, for example, mourning for the dead, for example, celebrating the harvest. All that kind of stuff is not necessarily mysticism. It also describes a lot of the social behaviors that humans were would partake in distant times. And to think that we are the apex of the evolution, that we are the zenith of human progress, it's simply hubris, to go back to Greece.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. And it just shows how much everything is actually connected. There is no separation of, but as humans, we like to label things, right? We like to put things in neat little boxes because it helps us structure thought, I suppose. So that's why we have this is mysticism, this is spirituality, this
The
is
brain
science.
likes to work and it cannot stray from that, the color palette of the patterns.
Yeah.
I have blue for I'm sad. I have red for when I'm angry. I have
Mm.
purple when I'm feeling elated, for example. I have a yellow when I feel over the moon, when I'm excited. So there are a lot of the color palettes. That one that came up with the color theory, his name was Chevret. He was an 18th century Frenchman, which is when the French were great in the 18th century. And he talked about certain colors. Let me put it like this: it's like alchemy before chemistry came into the scene. People who are alchemists, they were clergymen and they were academicians, they were professors, they were religious theologians, and they did not have the concept of chemistry because most of what is done in a laboratory today, it's artificial. Many of the rudimentary basic elements of the 1920 Mendeleev table of elements that does not apply to today. There are a lot of different not naturally, artificial elements that are being created on a daily basis
Yeah.
because there's so much variation between one particle and two. It's very, very complicated, but I'm not going to go into it. I'm not a chemist or a scientist, but it's indistinguishable from alchemy. So in the 18th century, when Chevret talks about theory of colors and how certain primary colors they need to be joined together in order to create another color, a colloquial color. And so people back then would have thought that he was practicing or performing some type of alchemy, not chemistry. And that is the difference between mysticism, religion, and science. Okay, the scientific method that arose in the Enlightenment in the 18th century with people like Gottfried Leibniz, the modern father of calculus, and also René Descartes, who was a mathematician. People forget that. He was not strictly speaking a philosopher.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I was like, I did not know that. Well, there you go.
Yeah. Isaac Newton, 20% of everything that Isaac Newton ever wrote was science, physics,
Mm,
mathematics. The rest of it is just mysticism, is just
yeah.
speculation. Only
Like,
20%. And he's considered one of the greatest scientists to ever lived. And that's true, of course.
amazing. And so we were talking before about how the brain likes containers and boxes, and how the brain likes containers. And you mentioned something a couple of minutes ago about creating new pathways for the brain to think, new ways of thinking. Now, I'm wondering, as a teacher, how do you integrate these mystical theories, these esoteric ideas into teaching in a way that resonates with young people? Because young people are so hooked on technology and this fast pace, they're not really interested in the foundational ways of thinking, I suppose, that we all come from. How does
Yeah.
that work for you in an actual teaching environment?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. You know, you cannot express some of the ideas that are contained in mystical teachings because students at every age, they cannot perceive theoretical or metaphorical ways of thinking. They cannot perform and function in that way when it comes to brain function. It goes down to the elasticity of the brain. So, elasticization process has not come to term. You know, it
Yes.
only ends or comes to term until the age of 25 or so. I'm already 33, so I'm a few years after the fact. And now my thinking has evolved and is more intricate and elaborate, but it's not an easy matter. Teaching, period, is not easy. After that, the next hurdle that you need to traverse is far more greater. Actually performing in class as a teacher, actually being able to supervise.
It takes a special person to be a teacher, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you should practice Zen Buddhism.
I actually, when I first became a mum, I read a book called Buddhism for Mothers. And it was all about Zen Buddhism. It had a bit of Daoism in there, and it helped a lot.
Yeah, yeah. You have to understand that they are not your peers when it comes to
Yeah.
intellectual rigorness. And you have to understand that. And I try to incorporate a lot of factoids from science, from history, from religion, but in the secular sense. Because if you incorporate politics or religion or gender in your classes, you're out.
Yeah, because you have to follow strict teaching guidelines in order to follow part of a syllabus, correct?
Yes, there is a policy. Now, in general, I'm speaking that you cannot talk about politics or religion in the class. That's not going to happen. But if you talk about politics, and there are a lot of teachers that do not shy away from politics in the classroom, and I
Mhm.
respect them for that. I do not go into politics because I don't want to create a greater divide in the class. It will be mayhem if we start a discussion that is very contentious and a very hot button topic. We will not be able to discuss it in class in a civil manner.
Yeah.
So that's one of the problems. I just try to lead by example. Some people think that philosophy and mysticism and science are different, but
Mm.
they're not. They're on a spectrum, they're in a field. And in that field, there are different points in the spectrum. So there are a lot of axioms as we talked about patterns, and we want to put back the toys in their right place. No, you don't want to create a mess for anyone.
Yeah.
Okay. So we want to put things in neat little boxes. It's like Forrest Gump as the box of chocolate. Life is like a box of chocolate. Well, what
Mhm.
he's referring to is not that you don't know what you will get from life, is that you want to put things in order. Even the chocolates in the chocolate box, they are put in some type of order. Yes, it's an artificial order, but nonetheless, it's some type of pattern that we can perceive. Same with philosophy. So people think that denominations of philosophy, they can be more scientific or less scientific. That's not true. That's simply not true.
Yeah.
Because the way we speak, rhetoric and oration, it absolutely has to do with science when you talk about biology. And
Mhm.
absolutely, the way the intonation and the accent and affliction of a person talking, it's absolutely based in science. When you excrete hormones, different types of hormones, when you speak to another person, so you
Mhm.
can make them feel fearful. You can make them feel more open. You can make them feel in love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get
So,
on some various things. So, can you explain to people who are listening or watching what the Kabbalah is?
so strictly speaking, if you open up the Encyclopedia Britannica and you go searching for term Kabbalah, this is the answer that you will get. So the Kabbalah was established in the 12th and the 13th to the 14th century in Western Europe, mainly in France and Spain. Jewish scholars did not call themselves the Kabbalists. The Kabbalah did not exist. In the 14th century, there was a book called the Zohar, and it was before the printing press revolution, before Gutenberg's revolution,
Yep.
and the Zohar came into circulation. Now, scholars speculate that the Zohar was written by one person, a rabbi from France called Moses de Leon in the early parts of the 14th century. This is strictly speaking the origins of the Kabbalah. Now, Jewish mysticism existed far longer than the existence of the Zohar. So the
Yeah.
writing of the Zohar is a lot closer to our contemporaneous epoch than the writing of the Zohar to the writing of the Bible, for example. The
Mm.
Bible was codified along with. Do you know what the Talmud and the Mishnah are?
I don't.
Well, the Talmud will not get into it, but well, I'll just mention it. The Talmud was a corpus of writing from the 3rd century BC to the 5th century AD. It was a corpus of writing, a lot of different legal writing. So there are a lot of different legal disputes within the halacha. The halacha is the Jewish code of law, okay, religiously. And it's a huge, hulking corpus. It's called the Talmud. And the Mishnah is a lot shorter. It was written between the 4th century BC to the 1st century AD. So it's a lot shorter, but it's the basis on which the Talmud was written. It was the core writing. So Jewish mysticism existed ever since the Hellenistic period. Okay.
Yeah.
There were a lot of Kabbalistic in nature. They were not strictly Kabbalah, they were not established system of philosophy. People conflate Kabbalah with strictly mysticism. That is not
Mhm.
true. Kabbalah is a philosophical system within Judaism. Okay. So
Interesting.
it's
Okay,
Jewish.
so philosophies like this, what role do they play in shaping modern education, in your
I'll
opinion?
tell you. I'll tell you exactly. I'll tell you in the Jewish sense how they shape not education. They actually alter reality.
Interesting. Tell me more.
That's what the Zohar tells us.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so just we're not going to go into all of the details, okay, when it comes to Kabbalah and the ways of thinking inside Kabbalah, but I'll give you the big picture. The light that shines emanates from the super being, the almighty, the omniscient creator. Let's just say a lot of people call it God or the creator. They call it the progenitor. Even Aristotle called God the progenitor, the unmoved mover. So the light of God shines upon creation, and that light is slowly funneled between a lot of different vessels. So you can imagine it. You have the universe that emanates light into the galaxies, and from the galaxies into the solar systems, from the solar systems to the planets themselves. So you can imagine it like that. But because, so it answers the question of good and evil. This is called a theodicy. Theodicy is the question that John Milton originally asked in Paradise Lost. Why do bad things happen to good people, and why do good things happen to bad people? That is the question of theodicy. The Kabbalah answers it in a very diplomatic kind of way. They say that if you sin, if you transgress the law, you accumulate a lot of bad karma, let's just call it. Just call it some kind of bad karma. And slowly your soul starts to rot from the inside. If you're a good person and you cannot receive, you are blinded to the light of God. So if you are a good person, you can absorb the light emanating from the super intelligence, the progenitor, the creator of the universe. And when you do that, slowly you start, it's an incremental influence. So once more and more people are actually able and open with their morality, with their character, they start to afflict changes on the physical world, not on the internal, intrinsic, spiritual existence, but the physical world. So it's very interesting in that way.
The question for me then becomes, if a good person is able to absorb that light from the progenitor, because we're not good all the time, right? When a bad person does a good thing, are they then able to access that light? Is that how it's explained?
If a bad person slowly starts to rehabilitate, shall we say, he will start to, it's like they give the metaphor of a tree. So the earth and the universe is a tree. The tree of the Kabbalah. They call this Sfirot in Hebrew. And Sfirot means counting, like in math. So you count the ways in which the light traverses from the top tier echelon to the bottom. And once it funnels and traverses more and more destinations or stations along the way, the light dwindles more and more. And once it reaches the bottom, there's not a lot of light to hand out
Yeah.
to all, not only humanity, but also the physical earth, the
Mm.
physical
Like a
reality,
black
which is
forest.
very, yeah, it's very interesting. It's
Mm.
very interesting, and it can explain a lot of natural phenomenons in a very interesting kind of way, because
Mm.
you're not going to say, well, this senator said that LGBT people caused a tornado or something like that in Ohio or something real ridiculous like that. No, not in those kinds of terms. It's not that ridiculous. But if you believe that your actions have concrete, epistemological stuff that we can perceive with our five senses, you start to think differently about your
Mm.
place and your existence and your role in creation itself. So, yeah, a good person can amend his past transgressions, he can atone for his sins, and he will be given clemency. And at the end, his soul will fill up with God's light, the progenitor, and together he will, in turn, naturally start to do good things and affect the world in a meaningful way. So that's the methodological logic.
And it makes a lot of sense. And I think that we've already answered this question, but I want to hear it in your kind of concise words. How has your study and love of mysticism and esoteric traditions influenced your own approach to life and also to learning what you continue to learn?
Yeah, let's take, for example, I'll start with generalization. People in the Dark Ages or the Bronze Age, they believe the sun. Let's take, for example, the Akkadian civilization. They believed that the sun was a deity. And the word Shemsu in Akkadian is now in Hebrew is the word for sun, Shemesh, Shemsu. So it's almost identical. And because it's a Semitic language, Akkadian and Hebrew. So they believe that the sun is a deity. The Greeks believed that the sun was a rock and the earth was another rock that is circulating the sun. So there were a lot of different beliefs. And I believe that I came to science because I wasn't scientifically inclined before I started taking an interest in mysticism. But I find myself kind of studying more science and chemistry and mathematics and natural history after I took an interest in mysticism. So it opened up a vast world that was completely closed off and completely unattainable for me. It was delegated to me through mysticism. I was able to be privy to that world and actually be somewhat competent when it comes to scientific knowledge, scientific terms, and I could stand in a debate. I think I can fare quite well because I like philosophy and rhetorics, and I think I'm a great speaker in a lot of ways. And I'm able to express myself in a very highfalutin language without breaking. So all that good stuff, it came from the mediation of science through and mysticism. Yeah.
Amazing. So we can see that science and the ecosystem, if you like, of science, mysticism, spirituality, religion,
Yeah.
esoteric practices, whatever you want to call these things, everything is
Because
interrelated.
they conflate and think that science is only the rational scientific method that is proven,
But the
beyond.
interesting science that I love is that it actually doesn't start out that way. All science starts with an hypothesis, and the
Yeah,
scientist goes out of their way to prove that hypothesis wrong. And when you get to a point where you're
yeah.
unable to prove the hypothesis wrong, well, then that becomes fact.
Yeah. And each time you create a new pattern, as I mentioned, you create a new synapse in the brain. It's like in chess. Let's take the game of chess. A lot of people like the metaphor of chess. It's a very prestigious endeavor. So I'll take chess for example. So there are a lot of different methods and patterns. And when you create, even if you change one syllable in a scientific established codified theory and hypothesis, if you prognosticate enough, then you'll get to a point where you've established that you open up a new porthole into whatever imagination start running free. And the implications, they have very real implication on the natural world.
Yeah. What a wonderful, rich tapestry that is available to us when we decide to become curious about those that have come before us, those that are developing new things now, and those who are looking into the future and perhaps seeing a new world that we're yet to experience. Now, Guy, we have a tradition here on the podcast called the book drop, and
Yeah.
we want to know what book has either changed your life or impacted you on a personal level or a professional level. What have you got for us?
There are a few books. One that comes to mind, a very impactful and powerful book for me. It's not really esoteric in nature, but it has some of the signs, some of the telltale signs of mysticism and esotericism. But there are a lot of interweaving, shall we say, connections with the esotericism. There's a great Jewish Austrian writer, author, publicist from the second half of the 20th century called Stefan Zweig. So Stefan Zweig was a great writer. Almost all of his writing were published posthumously after he died.
Yeah.
He escaped Nazi Germany in 1940, if I'm not mistaken. 1940 or 1938 with his wife. They escaped to Brazil.
Hmm.
And they did not know about the concentration camps. They did not know about the gas chambers. They did not know about the death trains that went from Berlin to Munich. They did not know about that. But once they heard about Nazi Germany invading Poland, systematically eradicating an entire group of people, the Jewish people, he and his wife committed mutual suicide in Brazil, unfortunately. But a lot of his writings were burnt by the decree of the Third Reich in Berlin, in Alexanderplatz Square. A lot of Jewish writing, Gypsy, Polish, Italian, Renaissance, all types of thinkers, free thinkers. Their books were burned to a crisp in a
Yeah.
big fire. He wrote a book called The Eye of the Eternal Brother. The Eye of the Eternal Brother. I can't remember where it's at. It's a civilization. It's a real civilization, but I can't remember which one. Maybe it will come up. But the story is a lot greater. The story talks about a great warrior and a king that was an emperor. It was in ancient India. Yeah. So great book. Great book.
I have
India.
not read it, but I will be sure to go and check out his writings. I
Yeah.
think
Very short.
that
It's not a book, it's a novella, but it's very good.
Mhm. Interesting. And I think that the burning of the books that was done in that particular reign of terror, or whatever you want to call it, by the Nazis was one of the saddest things that I think that I have ever heard of. I own a
Yeah,
publishing company.
I just gave an historical context for this.
Yeah, absolutely. But, there are so many books that have been banned or censored, the free thinkers. And I think it's amazing that people like you are able to remind us to go, hey, like, remember these people. And we go, oh, okay. And then we go and
Not
read
only
your
free
books.
thinkers, intellectuals, politics, journalists,
Intellectuals.
very important people, even important and non-important people, all their books were thrown into the fire just the same.
Mhm.
There was no
Yeah.
distinction.
Yeah. There was no distinction.
Yeah, which is insane.
Hopefully we can continue to evolve and to share our wisdom, and people from all walks of life. And Guy, thank you for sharing yours today with us. It's been such an interesting
Thank you so
conversation
much.
and has certainly helped me remember that science, religion, mysticism, all of those things are intertwined and can create such a rich tapestry for living by. So thank you for joining me today on the show.
Thank you so much, Tarryn. Hopefully I'll be back on your show, or you'll invite me back.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Have an
All right.
amazing day.
Have a great day.
That's a wrap on today's episode. If you love the insights and inspiration, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe to stay connected and turn your visions into reality alongside our community of changemakers. I'm Tarryn Reeves. Thank you for joining me. And remember, your story has power. See you in the next episode.